are hazards and risk. What are the hazards and risk? Hazard is basically something which has potential to cause harm. There are different type of hazards: physical hazards, chemical hazards, biological hazards. We will discuss each hazard separately in IGC 2 of Nebosh. The second one is risk. So what is the risk? Risk is basically the likelihood of hazard to cause harm in combination with the severity of the injury that might be sustained. Coming forward towards the risk profiling. What is the risk profiling? Risk profiling is basically a process of identifying the risk that can threaten any organization, and then we decide the control measure against this threat, and against this threat we will decide the control measure, and as a result of that we will process of identifying preemptive and each company and organization has its own risk profile. Going forward towards the risk assessment. What is the risk assessment? Now we will discuss that what is the risk assessment and how we can develop it. Risk assessment is a formal process of identifying preemptive and protective measures by evaluating the risk arising from a hazard, then deciding the control measures against these risks and hazards, and in the last deciding whether or not the risk is acceptable or not. As we have discussed earlier, that each company has its own risk profiling and each company maintains its own risk profile. A risk profile examines the nature and level of the threats faced by the organization, the likelihood of those adverse effects occurring, the level of disruption and cost associated with each type of risk, the effectiveness of control in place to manage those risks. Now we will discuss the outcome of the risk profiling. The outcome of risk profiling will be that the right risks have been identified and prioritized for action, the right control measures have been identified and implemented, and minor risks have not been given a disproportionate priority. As I told you earlier, that each company has its own risk profile depending upon the level of operation that company is conducting. Let's just take an example. There are two companies, Company A and Company B. Company A deal in a complex operations and Company B deals in less complex operations. So the risk profile of Company A will be higher than the risk profile of Company B because Company A is doing much complex operations than Company B, and the risk level of Company A is much higher than the Company B. Coming towards the risk profiling, as I told you earlier that each company has its own risk profile. There are 5 steps included in conducting the risk profile. We will discuss that each 5 steps separately. So what are these 5 steps? The first one is identify the risk that threaten the organization. We identify different kind of risks that can pose a serious threat to the organizations, and then identify the health and safety impact and the business impact associated with each threat. At this phase, we will evaluate each type of threat and its business impact associated with it. Then we will identify how well each threat is controlled, how we can control each threat and each risk involved in our business. Then we identify the likelihood of each threat happening. Then in the end, we will prioritize the threats and we will decide the control measures against it, and we will draw back the actions against these all threats and risk. Coming forward towards the purpose of risk assessment. Why we conduct risk assessment? We conduct risk assessment to prevent any kind of injury, death, any kind of loss incident, to avoid any kind of law breaches, and to avoid any kind of penalties from the legal authorities, and to prevent the cost of loss. What are these cost of loss? These are basically the direct and indirect costs which we discuss in the element 1 of Nebosh IDC 1. What is a suitable and sufficient risk assessment? Now we will discuss how we can make suitable and sufficient risk assessment. Suitable and sufficient risk assessment includes significant risk identification which enable employer to identify and prioritize control measures which is appropriate to the nature of work, proportionate to the risks. For example, if your organization is dealing in construction activities, so your risk assessment must be specific to the construction activities. It does not include any kind of other controls and hazards or risk associated with any other industry, and in the last it is valid for a reasonable time. For example, it should be reviewed schedulally on scheduled basis and on regular basis. While developing any kind of risk assessment in the organization, we will take help from internal and external sources while developing risk assessment. What are these internal and external sources? First, we will discuss the internal sources for preparing a risk assessment. The first one is accident records. While preparing a risk assessment, we have a detail and history of the accident record of that particular organization and or that company. So by seeing that and by reviewing that, we can easily make an efficient and effective risk assessment. The second one is ill health data and absence reports. By reviewing ill health data and absence reports, we can easily make our risk assessment and make it more efficient and effective. The third one is medical records. By reviewing the medical records and by reviewing the medical condition trends and patterns of our employees, we can easily identify any kind of disease or any kind of chronic disease present at our organization. And then it comes the risk assessment. The previous risk assessment, we can take help from the previous risk assessment which are conducted 1 or 2 years later. We can take actions and we can also review the hazards and risk involved in that risk assessment. Then it comes the maintenance reports. Maintenance reports will tell us the different idea and different information about the machinery which is being used at the organization, and by reviewing the maintenance records and reports of any kind of machinery, we can easily gauge the risk and hazards involved with that machinery. Then it comes the safety inspection. Safety inspections will tell us that what are the hazard and risk present at our workplace, and by reviewing that hazard and risk, we can easily make our risk assessment and we can make it effective, efficient, and according to the current risk level of the organization. Then it comes the audit and investigation reports. Audit and investigation reports will tell us the complete picture of our occupational health and safety management system, where we are standing, and according to that we can easily review and update our risk assessment, and even we can develop it. Last safety committee minutes or any kind of safety committee minutes during that year, by reviewing that minutes, we can easily identify the issues related to risk assessment, related to our health and safety management system, and by reviewing that and by developing that, we can make and develop an efficient risk assessment. Coming towards the external sources which can be used while developing risk assessment, we will now discussing the external resources. So what are these external resources? These are your national legislation. Your up-to-date national legislation will tell you that what are the risk and hazard involved with your organization, the approved codes of practice, the standards, for example ISO 45001, which is occupational health and safety management system standard. By reviewing that, we can easily identify different hazard and risk associated with your industry. And then it comes the manufacturer's information. For example, if you buy any chemical, any product, any equipment from the market, the manufacturer will give you a data sheet with it, and that data sheet involves all the risk and hazard involved with that equipment or any kind of product. You can easily review that manufacturer information and develop risk assessment based upon that. Then it comes the trade association. By reviewing the trade association and all the other things, you can easily develop your risk assessment. Then it comes the safety publication. By visiting different health and safety related websites, you can gather information from that website, and by reviewing those information, you can easily develop your risk assessment. Then it comes the international bodies. International bodies include OSHA for the US, Health and Safety Executive for the UK. You can visit their website and you can also review their legislation with regards to the health and safety, and by the help of that, you can easily develop the risk assessment. In the last, it comes trade union, charities, and even the insurance companies. These insurance companies and charities can give you an overall review and can give you the suggestion about the hazard and risk involved in your organization and how you can manage that. With the help of that, you can easily develop an effective and efficient risk assessment which can even prevent incident, accident, any kind of cause associated with the incidents. There are 5 steps to risk assessment. While we are developing any kind of risk assessment, we need to ensure that these 5 steps need to be embedded in the risk assessment while we are developing it. What are those 5 steps? We will discuss each step in detail. So let's just start with this step 1. Identify the hazards. For example, if you are going to conduct a risk assessment of a construction site, you will go there, you will physically identify the hazards in that construction site. For example, that hazards can be physical hazards, chemical hazards, biological hazards, fire hazard, or electrical hazards. After identifying the hazard, there comes the step 2. Identify the people who might be harmed and how. So while identifying the people who might be harmed and how, those people are the workers which are working there, and any kind of all other community workers which are passing by there, and any kind of visitors. These are all the audience that might be harmed by those hazards which we have identified in step 1. Coming to the step 3, now we will evaluate the risk against these hazards. By evaluating the risk against this hazard, and we will decide the precautions now against those risks. And after that, it comes the step 4. We will record the findings and implement them. In step 5, it comes a review and update as necessary. After developing the risk assessment, we need to set a regular schedule for a risk assessment so we can update and review it regularly to keep it update with our risk level and the current risk level of the company. Starting with the step 1, identify the hazards. How we can identify the hazard? Now we will see different kind of techniques by using which we can identify the hazards. First, we will understand what is safety and what is health. Safety is basically capable of causing physical injury. What are those injuries? These injuries can be result from work at height activities, falling objects, moving vehicles, machinery, any kind of electrical hazards, any kind of chemical hazards, low oxygen concentration, deep water activities, fire and explosion, animals, and in the end, violence. Coming forward towards the health. Now, what is health? Health is capable of causing occupational disease or ill health. What are the different ill health issues and what are the different activities which can cause health issues? These are physical, chemical, biological, ergonomical, and psychological. We will discuss each of these examples in Nebosh IGC 2, and we will discuss there in detail that what is work at height, what is falling object hazard, what is moving vehicle hazard, and what are physical, chemical, or biological hazards. There are different type of hazard identification method. Now we will discuss each identification method separately. The first one is task analysis, in which we analyze job components before the job start. Then it comes the legislation, the standard guidance document, legal authorities requirement. Then it comes the manufacturer information. As I told you earlier that if we buy any kind of equipment or any kind of product from the market, the manufacturer gives its data sheet with the product, and on that data sheet it is mentioned all the risk and hazards associated with that specific product or to the specific equipment. Then in the end, incident data. Incident data basically are the accident, near misses, and ill health records of that specific year or that specific duration for which you are going to conduct the risk assessment. Forward towards the task analysis. What is this task analysis? How we can identify hazards by using the task analysis method. So let us just start with the task analysis. Task analysis involves different steps. The first one is we have to select the task, and then we have to record the stages of task. Then we need to evaluate risk associated with each stage. Then we will develop the safe working method and implement the safe working method, and we will monitor that to ensure whether our task analysis is efficient, effective or not. Let me just give you an example of task analysis. For example, if I want to do any kind of welding work on a live pipeline, what steps I gonna refer and I gonna consider while doing that work? First of all, I will mobilize my material towards the area location, and by going there I will barricade the area, and then I will de-energize the pipeline because I need to weld that pipeline, and for that de-energizing is must. These are all the steps of my activity. Now what I will do, I will identify and evaluate the risk associated with each step, and then against that I will decide the control measures. Then I will record those control measures, and then I will proceed to my activity. This whole process is basically called task analysis. Moving forward toward this step 2, in which we will identify the people who might be at harm. So who are these people? These people can be workers, operators, for example maintenance staff, cleaners. These people can be the staff of contractor. These people can be the visitors who are visiting any kind of site or any area. These people can be the members of public who are even just crossing by or passing by there, or who are even just crossing from there. So these are all the personnel which can be at risk while we are considering developing the risk assessment. There are some vulnerable groups or peoples. Why these are called vulnerable? Because they are more exposed to risk and hazard associated with any kind of activity. These vulnerable groups or individuals are young people, new or expectant mother, for example, pregnant mothers, disabled worker, lone worker. We will discuss each one in the detail later in this element. Now we will move on to the step 3, which is evaluating the risk and deciding the precaution against that risk. As you can see on the screen is that risk is equal to likelihood into severity. Below there is a table which shows the likelihood column and the severity column. The likelihood column is quantified from 1 to 5 and the severity column is also quantified from 1 to 5. For example, if we are doing any kind of activity which involves the likelihood at the number 3, it means the likelihood is possible, and from the severity block we will select 2. In that activity there is a chances of first aid injury. So what we will do, we will just multiply 3 from the likelihood and 2 from the severity. So our total risk will be 6. Now we will go to the risk assessment matrix. The matrix, as you can see on your screen, is basically called risk assessment matrix, in which on x-axis there is likelihood and on y-axis there is severity. The severity is quantified from 1 to 5 and likelihood is also quantified from 1 to 5. As we will come on to the previous slide, in which we identified that our likelihood is 3 and our severity is 2. It means we fall on a yellow range which is 6. So our risk will be 6. So basically this is the method of using the risk assessment, and this is the method of basically calculating the risk associated with your job and with any kind of high risk activity your workers are performing. General hierarchy of control. General hierarchy of control involves different process and different steps. We will discuss each step in detail separately. We will start with elimination. In elimination, for example, if a worker is doing any work at height activity, what we will do, we will eliminate